Hey everybody, it's Robert Hall, and in today's video we're going to be comparing the Westcott FJ400 versus the Godox AD400 Pro, aka the Flashpoint Xplor 400 Pro. Now you might be asking, Rob, the Westcott was released back in 2019 and the Godox AD400 Pro even a year before that. Why are you comparing these two products right now? And this is the reason. Here's the Westcott FJ80 and this is the Westcott FJ200. Autorama just sent me the entire Westcott FJ series. That way I could compare it head to head against the Flashpoint series of lighting. In order to compare the entire ecosystem of lights, I really had to see how these two stacked up, especially considering it's the most powerful offering currently available in the Westcott FJ series. I'll follow this video up with comparisons between the Westcott FJ80 and the Godox V1 or Zoomlion X and the Westcott FJ200 against the Godox AD200 Pro, aka the Flashpoint Evolve 200. So if you want to catch those future comparisons, then make sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you just enjoy these unbiased reviews, please hit the like button. It really helps me out against the YouTube algorithm, and it just helps other people who are searching this topic find my video. Alright, so comparing these two lights, which for the rest of this video I'm just going to call the Westcott and the Godox so we don't get confused saying 400 times throughout this video, but this is a very natural comparison because these two lights are very similar. They're similarly sized, they're both portable lights because they're both powered by a battery. They're both Bowens mount, sort of, and they both have a very similar feature set, including remote power control, TTL, high-speed sync, masking functions, stroboscopic functions, and both are part of a broader ecosystem of lighting, meaning there are compatible products that they work with. Now, in terms of sizing, the Westcott FJ400 is a little bit larger, not only physically, which I'm sure you can see, it is wider, it is a bit longer, it's thicker in all dimensions.
It's also 0.8 pounds heavier, and that's about 1/3 of a kilo for those not in the US.
Now I did say both of these are Bowens mount compatible. So the Westcott is natively Bowens mount. That is the only option for modifiers to put on it unless you were to use some type of third-party adapter. But the Godox is Bowens mount if you put this ring on. However, this ring, which comes included in the box, can also be removed, and then the light is only Godox mount, which you can see right here. That is a much smaller mount, and that mount is really handy for any type of travel work because the modifiers are so much smaller than the Bowens mount modifiers. And one of my personal favorites is the Godox AD-S65 softbox. 65? No, sorry. Godox S85 softbox is my personal favorite. That's a 85 centimeter or 33.4 inch softbox, but it is tiny. I mean, it packs up almost the size of an umbrella. So that's what I use for a lot of my on-location work, and especially when I'm actually hopping on a plane to go do any type of work. Both of these lights have a similar setup on the side. They have a screen, dial, and buttons for controlling the functions of the light. Now, the Westcott is definitely a little bit nicer to look at. It's fully color, it's definitely got more pixels, so it just looks a little bit cleaner, and I just think it has more contrast. But the only thing that you see in large text over here on the Westcott is the power, whereas on this one you see the group and the power. When it comes to actually using these lights, the reason that you tend to look at the side panel at all is to check their group and to check their channel. If those things are right, then the power is just going to work properly. But if you're having some type of connection issue, that's where you end up referring to the display and looking for confirmation of the group and channel. You can also see we've got integer power levels here and we've got fractions over here. So integers tend to be a little bit more friendly for beginners just because they are simpler numbers, whereas I personally think fractions are more representative of what is actually happening to light, whereas this is kind of turning stops of light into an integer scale. All right, next let's get into the performance differences between these two lights. Now I'm about to throw a lot of figures at you, so if you're finding it tough to keep up with those or just want to see something in more detail, I created a spreadsheet that lists all of the figures that I tested using my light and color meter. You can find that linked in the description below right next to the links to purchase either of these two lights. The first major takeaway is at full power, the Westcott is 40% brighter than the Godox. Now that may not seem like a lot to you, however, when you're outside trying to get every last drop of power, it comes in handy. I also tested them both in high-speed sync at full power, and there they were equivalent. They both produced the same amount of maximum light output. The other thing I tend to pay attention to to when testing a light's output is its output stability and its range. I want to see if the light actually goes down a stop when you drop the light one stop of output. And the Godox was a little bit superior in terms of overall like range and accuracy. Now each of these lights has a mode that is more geared towards color stability and a mode that is more geared towards action, so freezing action with short flash duration. I also tested the color of these two lights, and the Godox definitely outperformed the Westcott in terms of color stability. This was in both modes, both the action and the color stable mode. In the action mode, the Godox is actually still really good, whereas the Westcott got a really wide Kelvin range as far as 700 Kelvin. And in the color stable modes, the Godox just had a very tiny range of color throughout the entire power range, whereas the Westcott had around 150 Kelvin, which to be fair is still pretty good. Also in its color stable mode, the Westcott did suffer from a little bit of a magenta tint issue. The next thing I tested was T.1 flash durations. That's something that I can test using the Sekonic L858 light meter. And flash durations is something that not every photographer pays attention to, but it's really important if you're trying to freeze action. So if you're trying to capture like liquid splatters or even fast moving human subjects, then flash durations become really important. Now, if we're just looking at power levels, the Westcott FJ400 wins. It just has shorter flash durations across its entire power range. However, we got to remember that the Westcott FJ400 is 0.4 of a stop brighter, which means if you were using these two lights and you were using this one at full power, you wouldn't need full power from this light. And that just means this goes even more in the favor of the Westcott FJ400. Its flash durations become even shorter when you're looking at the output. So for freezing action, the Westcott FJ400 is far superior. Keep in mind though, you do suffer some pretty wild color shifts in that mode. Next thing is the recycle time. Now, technically, both of these lights recycled their full power in 0.9 of a second, so just under a full second. However, again, if we were comparing these based on output, then we would have to drop the Westcott FJ400 down 0.4 of a stop, at which point the Westcott slightly edges out the Godox in terms of its recycle time, but both of these are quite fast, and I think they provide pretty much an identical experience in terms of keeping up with fast-paced shooting. Now, when it comes to recycle time, a very hot topic is thermal protection, especially because the Godox does not actually have any system that monitors the internal temperature. Its thermal protection is done through a counter-based system, meaning once you hit a number of shots in a certain window that nobody knows, then it is going to start to slow down its recycle speed to protect the light. And naturally, the Westcott has a system as well, although I'm honestly not sure if it's thermal, actually monitoring the internal temperature, or if it's just a counter system as well. But what I do know is I tested both of these lights by firing them at full power until they started to slow down. And the Godox started to slow down at full power at 75 shots. The Westcott started to slow down at 78 shots. So they're pretty much the same in terms of their thermal protection, at least when I was indoors. Now, something I also noticed is that when this Westcott hit that 78th shot and it started to slow down its recycle time to protect the light, the battery gauge also went from 3 out of 4 bars down to 0. However, that was simply a display issue. It wasn't actually about the capacity of the battery, like getting taxed or anything like that. And once you let the light cool off, it regains back to wherever it was when you started. Next up is battery capacity. The Westcott is capable of around 480 full power flashes, and the Godox is around 390, just under 400. So the Westcott's already in the lead there. And this is another statistic that gets more impressive when you consider the output, because if we were matching this peak output, then the Westcott is going to get even more than 480 full power flashes per charge. Now, none of this is a surprise, because look at the difference in size between these two batteries. The Westcott is significantly larger, even though by capacity it's only 65 watt hours versus 56 watt hours. So not a huge difference in terms of that actual capacity, but yeah, the Westcott is much larger. There's also some functional differences as well. First off, this Westcott handle, I just think it's way better than the Godox. If you already own the Godox AD400 Pro, then you would know that the washer that they use is kind of slick, and therefore when you're using a large modifier, it kind of forces you to over tighten this if you really want to lock that off. And even then, if the modifier is large enough, I'm talking like 48-inch deep parabolic type softbox, you can still experience a little bit of sag. So some users have gone as far to replace this washer with a different one that is a little bit grippier. The Westcott just takes less pressure to tighten it down, and when it is tightened down, it feels more secure. Next up, both of these have an umbrella holder built in underneath the Flash, so they are compatible right out of the box with any type of umbrella modifier. Both of them use a spring to hold the umbrella in place. Now, the whole reason for that design is so that if you're outside and a big gust of wind comes, the spring isn't tight enough that your entire light will topple over. Instead, just the umbrella will slide out. Now on the Godox, that creates an issue because if you're using it with a very large umbrella and you're, say, booming the umbrella, or you've got it mounted in some near vertical fashion, then the umbrella can slide in that shaft because it just doesn't have the pressure to tighten it down. And the Westcott resolves this by using a screw in addition. So you kind of have freedom of choice here. You can use just the spring that's on the inside, or you can really tighten it down using this screw. That's definitely a pro for the Westcott. These two lights have a little bit different of a bulb design. The Westcott has a two-piece setup, so you can remove this glass housing without adjusting the flash tube, whereas if I pull the housing off of this, the flash tube comes with it. It's all one piece on the Godox. The only benefit I can really think there is that if I were to drop this and break this bulb, I feel like I have to replace the whole bulb even if the flash tube hasn't been damaged. Whereas if this were to suffer any damage breaking the glass, I'm not gonna have to purchase a flash tube with it. Next up on the Westcott, the charger that comes included in the purchase of it will also work as kind of a pseudo AC adapter. So as long as the battery is over 25% power, you can plug the charger in and run this light theoretically indefinitely, as long as you don't kind of outpace how fast it can charge. You cannot do that on the Godox. It's stated directly in the manual, do not charge this light while in operation. And there's an additional accessory, the AC adapter, and that costs $110. So if you're looking to make this your outdoor on location strobe and a indoor studio strobe, just know that's an additional purchase you'd have to make that comes in the box on the Westcott. Next up is extension heads. On the Godox, you can easily remove this, plug in an extension head, which surprisingly I don't actually own for this light, but we can plug in the extension head to this and then have a cabled head, and that allows us to mount this lower onto a stand and only have like 1 pound at the top of the stand. This is great for booming. This is great when working in windy conditions because the bulk of your light now becomes your counterweight and you have way less weight at the top of the stand. There's no functionality like that on the Westcott. And the reason for that is likely just the flash tube design. Again, this is all one piece, so we can pull it out in the field. It doesn't matter how dirty our hands are. We can grab this and then just put the extension head in. Whereas this, what do you get? You're gonna wash your hands and then put gloves on to remove your flash tube in the field. Likely not. So I think that's why they just forgoed that accessory altogether on the Westcott. 20 watt modeling lamp on the Westcott, 30 watt modeling lamp on the Godox. Neither of them are going to be usable for modeling in a softbox outdoors. They might get away with using indoors in a softbox at close proximity. That's about it. I don't think it's the intended purpose of these lights. They're just there in case you need to focus in the dark. Unlike when I do, say, a Godox versus Pro photo comparison, and they are similar in performance, but the Godox is 1/3 the price, here we've got two lights that are almost the same price. This one is $599 and this one is $649. Those are their default prices. However, I've seen these down in the $400 range, depending on like the holiday special, Black Friday type deal. I haven't really paid attention to the Westcott, so I'm not sure if they've gone down in price at any point. That being said, the price difference is very minimal and the performance difference between these two lights is pretty minimal as well. If all you ever wanted was a 400 watt light, like I need one light, 400 watt light, what's the best? I do think the Westcott is superior. Not only is it a tiny bit cheaper, but those big three categories of power output, recycle time, and flash duration, those are, to me, the most important components of a flash. All the features are the same, so when we just look at those three lights, the Westcott is a little bit superior in all of those categories. Now, if you're not only looking at one specific 400 watt light and you are thinking about having a mixed bag of lighting, maybe some speed lights, maybe some portable 200 watters, or maybe a big old 1200 watt light, well, I think Godox has the better overall ecosystem of lights and available options so that you can build a more diverse kit. That being said, Westcott is expanding their series, so who knows, a year from now, they may start filling more of the gaps that Godox already has available. So my only hope is that this video answered the questions that you have about these lights. That way you can make the decision by comparing based on the categories that are most important to you. And if this video did that, please make sure to give it a like. Again, I'll be following up, completing this series of comparisons so that you guys can see about the other lights. So follow if you want to see those. Other than that, I'll catch you in the next one.